Hello and welcome to episode 98 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined by friend of the show and MMO contributor, Mathias Altman-Kurosaki. Mathias, thanks for coming on again, man. Obviously, last time we spoke, things were a little higher. Season over now, as we know, heading into the offseason here for the Mets, which is probably going to be one of the more exciting off seasons we think in probably a while. Just before we get rolling here, just your initial thoughts, reactions to what was really one of the more fun seasons in recent memory for Mets teams and fans.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the season a lot. I thought this summer was so much fun. And from the highest highs to the lowest lows, I mean, this team feels like never quit. And I mean, I'm really proud of what they accomplished this year. I feel like this is, my oldest brother talks a lot about the 1999 team, and I feel like this is probably our version. A team that didn't win it all, but they made it to the NLCS. They fought to the very last out. So this was a great season. I think they have nothing to be ashamed of.
No, absolutely. Lost to the better team. Looked better than the team that played them in the World Series. No need to talk about them. Who cares? But just definitely a fun year. A lot of guys that seem to really overperform, have career years, and a team that really gelled together, played for one another. Obviously, we know what Stearns did as far as the mid-level signings that turned out to be really really huge down the stretch. Two of those, Manaea and Severino, paid huge dividends for them this year. Part of on top of that was you saw a lot of chemistry, right? I know in today's baseball, that's not a huge thing that's pushed as much now with analytics and things of that nature. There was a real chemistry to this team, and hopefully it's something that they can replicate for the next few years. Obviously, the group's going to look a bit different than it did this year outside of a couple of those key guys. But, obviously, I think Mets fans should be very, very excited for the beginning of the Stearns Mendoza era, for what should be, hopefully, a nice, fruitful relationship for everybody involved here. But I mentioned two guys, obviously, Sean Manaea, Luis Severino, that were huge pieces for the Mets this year. Fortunately, it isn't time to talk offseason stuff now. Like we said, there was qualifying offers extended today. The Mets did three of those. I don't think to any shock to anyone. Extended qualifying offers to Pete Alonso, Sean Manaea, and Luis Severino. I would imagine all three of those guys are going to decline that and seek long-term deals elsewhere. We know Manaea had opted out of his deal. Obviously, this is, as far as in his case, the Mets, I guess, kind of answered to that. But, three players, qualifying offers extended to. And, potentially if all three guys leave, right, that's three draft picks that you get. But I think at least two of those three guys, if you can, you'd like to bring back to be part of the core moving forward.
Yeah, really, I think though the one that surprised me a little bit was Severino, because you look at his overall numbers, and yes, he was a solid pitcher, but his ERA plus was only 101. That doesn't necessarily scream $21 million at me. So I'm not surprised at all that Alonso and Manaea got theirs, but I think Severino might accept this. I'm being completely honest. I don't know what other team would give him 21 million right now per year. You look, there are a couple other guys who got the qualifying offer around the league. I know Nick Martinez and Nick Pivetta are both guys who might take it because, again, they're guys that I'm not sure what other team would offer them 21 million. So I think, Alonso and Manaea are almost 100% going to decline their offer. But I think Severino, given the way he performed this year and, how he's dealt with injuries in years past, I wouldn't be surprised if he stays and just decides to take the QO.
It's interesting. I think from as far as the Mets are concerned, I know I've talked about it. I'm sure we will as well. As far as if you're going to bring back Manaea or Severino long term, Manaea is the guy that I think consensus wise that you'd obviously want to bring back on a long term deal. Severino, like you mentioned, his health history of injuries that you worry after really, the first complete year he's had, maybe 4 or 5 seasons, right? Health wise, you would just worry long term, giving him a long term deal if he can kind of, sustain that health wise and make 30 plus starts a year. I'm not really sure. So it's interesting. I wonder, from the Mets standpoint, you obviously wouldn't want to give him a long-term deal, but 21 million is probably a lot. But for someone that showed that he was healthy, pitched deep in the playoffs for them, obviously, was a big piece if you can have him as a mid back rotation guy, I'm sure for even $21 million, the Mets feel like that would be nice to add for another year. It wouldn't be a long-term commitment. And on Severino's end, who knows, right? I guess it depends on the player's thought process. I would think that he would want to cash in on a good year as far as on a multi-year contract. However he can get that. I would assume it would be from another club, not from the Mets. But it's interesting as far as what you said, thinking it's just as far as AAV wise, no one would probably give him close to 21 million. So he may just want to take that. So that's going to be interesting to see whether what he does or not. I think either way, it's probably a win-win for the Mets.
Yeah, exactly. And as far as the other pending free agents, because there are a lot of them, like you said earlier. You guys, Jesse Winker and Jose Iglesias are definitely guys you want to consider bringing back. Ryan Stanek was great down the stretch for the bullpen. So there are a few other guys beyond just Alonso, beyond just these three guys who I think are candidates to stick around. I honestly wonder about Jose Quintana too. I think Quintana almost played himself into given who's gotten the qualifying offer on the pitching side of things, I wouldn't have been surprised if he'd gotten a qualifying offer.
Sure.
So they have a lot of intriguing guys hitting free agency, and I think there are a few guys that they should circle for guys they should try to re-sign.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's an interesting one. As far as bringing back Stanek, guys of that nature, like you mentioned. Were you surprised at all? Speaking of arms, that the Mets let go of or had not brought back Phil Maton. I know that came out today that the Mets were not bringing him back, that they released him or whatever. Obviously, I know he wasn't great in the postseason, but during the regular season, he got the ball a lot after the trade. It seemed to be pretty effective. I was just curious if you were surprised by that at all.
Yeah, the more I think about it, I'm not as surprised that they turned it down. It was an $8 million option,
Okay.
pretty much, or a little under $8 million, and he was great in August, and he was great for most of September. But you could see his arm was definitely starting to tire.
Sure.
It feels like he was the entire circle of trust, especially once Daniel Nunez got hurt. So, seeing his arm tire like that and the way he pitched in the postseason, he really, really struggled in the postseason. This is a guy who coming into this year had great postseason numbers. So I'm not all that surprised that they let him go, but I wouldn't be surprised if he comes back on maybe a slightly cheaper deal. So I think that he could be maybe not as high of a leverage guy, say a middle innings, sixth, seventh inning guy. I could see him coming back and working out. I just don't necessarily think that he was going to be worth the $8 million he was going to be owed.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. If you can get him back a little bit cheaper, I think that obviously everything helps as far as we know the big fish they're going to try and land, which we'll get to in a minute here. But a couple other transactions that happened today. Actually, the Mets were signed two pitchers. Actually, I believe it was on the 31st, or I'm sorry. So they signed two pitchers, right-hander Dylan Covey, and another guy that guys might be a little familiar with, Chris Davinsky. I know he was to a minor league contract, but he's a guy I feel like had some success with, I believe it was Tampa. So
he was great with Houston.
Right. Yep. So just kind of want to get your thoughts there. Obviously, these are the things that Stearns kind of makes his money on, especially in the bullpen, kind of these signings or, acquisitions that may not, scream out on off the page at first, but, tend to, with his development and whatnot, guys seem to really, seem to pan out under him. So I'm just curious what you think of these two guys here.
Yeah. Like you were saying, this feels like typical David Stearns signings here. Both guys who, have been great in years past. Dylan Covey really struggled as a starter with the White Sox, but when he went to the Phillies in 2023, he was decently effective as a reliever, and he missed most this year with an injury, didn't pitch in the majors. And then Davinsky was an all-star and a World Series champion for the Astros in 2017, one of their best relievers. Again, though, he kind of got derailed the last few years, and this year struggled in the majors with Tampa Bay, but he was really good in the minors for Seattle towards the end of the year. So I think these are two guys who, maybe they make the team as depth guys, the way Reed Garrett did this year, or Jose Buto, like those type of guys. Maybe they work out as sort of, fifth, sixth innings, maybe multi-inning guys. I think they can be effective, though. They have at least some for Davinsky. He has more of the track record, but I think Kobe too showed that he could be an effective big league pitcher. So these guys might not be headline grabbers, but I think they're definitely worth keeping an eye on because they could be effective for this team.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Not necessarily headline grabbers, but team, guys that can really contribute for the team in 25. But pivoting to what is a headline grabber, there is one Juan Soto, who's a free agent now, plays across town or played across town. Obviously, didn't work out with the Yankees in the World Series. He had a pretty good postseason, went kind of quiet in the World Series, which I guess as the rest of the Yankees did. But he made it very clear that he's open for business. All 30 clubs can entertain him. In theory, obviously only few, I think, have the checkbook to really do it. But he's not saying no to anything, and he is ready to be courted. So just want to get your thoughts here on the Soto sweepstakes. Is he someone you think the Mets should make a priority? Do you think they should take that $600-700 million and split it elsewhere to add to the team? I'm just kind of curious where your thoughts are with the Mets going after the big fish here.
100% you back up the truck for this guy. Juan Soto is only 26, and he's already accomplished so much in his big league career. And the best is probably yet to come for this guy. So, and he's shined on the biggest stages. It's beyond just that big 3-run homer he hit against Cleveland. Or, he had a big ALCS, he had a big ALDS. Yes, he did sort of fade a little bit in the World Series, but he still, he hit a home run in Game 2 off of Yamamoto. He's a very, very talented player. He's a corner outfield guy, obviously. Maybe, as he ages, he becomes a DH, but he's worth the money. And he was great in the playoffs as a 20-year-old back in 2019. I mean, he had a huge World Series against Justin Verlander and Garrett Cole. So this is a guy who's not afraid of the bright lights. Now we know he can play in New York. I mean, he had a career-high 41 homers. I think if you're Steve Cohen and David Stearns, you give him whatever he wants because this guy can turn a already pretty good lineup into a great lineup and arguably a top 5 in all of baseball.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to argue otherwise, right? Between the financial resource that we know the Mets have, plus where they are now, a guy like that could put that lineup over the top. It's going to be really interesting to see, how much the pinstripes of the Yankees really play a part in it or not. If he's willing to take a little bit less to stay with the Yankees, to play with Judge, keep playing with Judge, I should say, or money talks. And from what it sounds like, the Mets are going to not be denied as far as price goes. So it'll be interesting to see. I wonder though, to a point, with they're going to need other pieces, obviously pitching as well, which we'll talk about in a minute here. If they can spend this much on one player and then still kind of fill the holes that they're going to need to, if they can do an Ohtani deal and backload the entire contract, which I'm sure is what they're already planning on doing or whatever, then it's definitely, it's an absolute no brainer at that point. But it's going to be interesting to see how many teams are actually in on Soto. If it's going to be 2, 3, 4, just like the big markets, and what these offers are going to be, and really how quickly he gets off the board, right? Obviously Ohtani did it quick last year. I think understood that, and needed to do so for the other dominoes to fall within free agency. Kind of had that mantle, and Soto's going to have that this year. So it'll be interesting. Obviously, he's a Boris client. Boris didn't really do well last off seasons. I don't know how much all that's going to play in, but bottom line, he's going to get a lot of money to play somewhere. And hopefully he is on the Mets and, deserves to be a Gold Glove finalist, unlike this year and, Lindor not being one, but whatever. That doesn't matter. We're on the Brits. Okay. Who cares? But I guess moving on from the player side, position player side, obviously I said, the Mets have a few more holes here, but, I just want to get your thoughts on the pitching side of free agency. We touched on it a bit as far as with what they could do with Manaea and Severino, obviously offer them both the qualifying offer and see what they do as far as maybe offering one of them a long-term deal. But obviously guys like Corbin Burns, Max Fried are going to headline that starting pitcher class. I'm wondering if you have a preference, if there's one you'd like over the other. I forgot to mention Blake Snell. Obviously, he opted out of his deal with the Giants. So that's a third big name on the market. So I'm just wondering if there's a preference out of these kind of couple of big horses here, front end starters that are on the market as well, that maybe you'd like to see the Mets go after.
So the guys I'm definitely intrigued by, Burns for sure. He's also a former David Stearns guy in Milwaukee, but Blake Snell was fantastic down the stretch last year.
Sure.
1.23 ERA after coming back from injury, and that's an 80 inning span. That's not like all right, he had a good 2 weeks.
Right.
He threw a no hitter during that time. He held opponents to a 382 OPS over that stretch. I would give Blake Snell a pretty hefty contract. Burns, I know has more of the workload to him.
Sure.
Like, you can probably depend on him more to pitch every fifth day, but I definitely look at Burns and Snell. And then another guy who I think really started to peak during the playoffs is Walker Buehler, who the Dodgers did not offer a qualifying offer to. So Buehler is another guy I'd look at, maybe more of like a Severino type deal. Maybe you give him a 1-year deal, or maybe a Manaea type deal where you give him a 2-year deal and you give him an opt-out, because his stock definitely did take a hit during the regular season. He was coming back from an injury and not that effective, but he was fantastic in the playoffs after that first start he had against the Padres. So those are the guys that I think really grab the headlines. And then maybe you get a back-end guy, maybe like Matt Boyd, or maybe Tomoyuki Sugano is probably going to come over to the States. Maybe you try to get him again. There are a lot of options. They need both starters and relievers, if we're being honest. The bullpen was probably the biggest weakness all year, and there are still question marks there. So you got to look at the starters. That's probably priority number one, but we can't overlook the bullpen. There are some intriguing guys on the free agent market, but also on the trade market. Devin Williams is apparently on a trade ship this offseason. So very curious to see how they address the pitching side of things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Buehler's a great name to look at too. I completely agree with you, and think of him as that Severino type. You're bringing on a 1-year prove-it deal, or like you said, a Manaea 2 years with an opt-out. Obviously, like you said, didn't have a great regular season, but really, buckled down when he needed to in the postseason. Obviously, that built his stock back up. And that's someone I would absolutely take a flyer on a 1-year deal like that. I think that's a great call. And as far as the bullpen, you nailed it there as well. The more, the better. They can't at this point. As many arms as they could bring in for the bullpen would be awesome. Devin Williams is interesting. I wonder what it would take to give up on him. Is he in his last year of his deal? That I'm not sure how much control he has.
Yeah, it was more that it was more surprising that the Brewers decided to decline his option. So he's going to go through arbitration this year instead of getting his $10 million. So he's on a cheaper deal, and yes, he is on an expiring deal. So the Brewers, as we saw last year with when they traded Corbin Burns, they like to make those type of deals, and I wouldn't be surprised if they end up moving him. He might. I will say, I think his price isn't as high now as it was entering last year before the back injury. I think the way that he struggled in the postseason against the Mets, and the way he struggled in the postseason in years past kind of hurts him. And the fact that he had that back injury, but we know how good he is when he's healthy.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. The best changeup in baseball when he's healthy, unless he's hanging it to Alonso, but that's a different story. We're okay with that. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Stearns does as far as to patch up the bullpen there. Like you said, it really was the biggest weakness for them all the year. It's kind of patchwork all the way through. Even Diaz obviously had an up and down year, which we know, and even the postseason and leading up to it. So that's something that absolutely have to shore up. I'm wondering, a couple of guys, just thinking of them. I mentioned Fried before, Max Fried. Wondering if he's a guy that you would want on the radar. Someone who's has killed the Mets over the last few years. We know he's pitched in a lot of big games. Just wondering if he's someone you'd want to maybe open up the Brinks truck for too, as far as heading a rotation.
Yeah, my only concern with Fried is that he did kind of have 2 injury-plagued years in a row.
Sure.
So that's my one concern with him. But when he's healthy, he's a workhorse.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely not opposed to giving him what he wants. I know, like I said, this year again, he got hurt late in the year. And the year before that, he only made 14 starts. But he made 30 starts in 2022 and was runner-up in the Cy Young voting. So you know what you're getting with Max Fried when he's healthy.
Sure.
So I would consider it.
Sure. And another name, now again, we don't know what's going to happen, obviously, with Alonso and Soto, kind of these things. But someone that stands out to me as a potential Alonso replacement if they do sign Juan Soto is Christian Walker, who was on the Diamondbacks the last few years. I know Vientos can move to first base as well, obviously being a corner guy. But for me, if I had the choice, and again, it's a perfect world, we don't know what's happening, but let's say the Mets do sign Soto, we assume that takes them out of the running for Alonso. Obviously long-term deal-wise or whatever, we don't know, but let's assume that. I would feel more comfortable leaving Vientos at third base and bringing in someone like Christian Walker to play first for a couple of reasons. One, I don't like the options at third base, especially free agency. Alex Bregman, I know, is kind of the highlight of that class. He's someone I would not want to give a big deal to at all. He's really has clearly offensively declined the last few years, and you can see that. So I would rather keep Vientos at third, where I know my power is going to be, and bring in someone like Christian Walker, who's not only a Gold Glove defender, but can hit for a good amount of power, can run the bases well, can steal some bags when you need, and I think potentially be a good fit to replace an Alonso if that happens to be the case. I'm just wondering what you think there.
Yeah, that's the first name that came to my mind when it came to replacing Pete Alonso. And I will say, before Matt Chapman inked his extension,
Sure,
that was one guy I would have been willing to open up the checkbook for at third base. But Christian Walker's a 3-time Gold Glover now at first base. He hits for power. He's hit over 30 homers twice. He hit 26 this year, and that was with an IL stint. He hit 29 in 2019. He's a very good all-around first baseman. He's on the older side, so it'd maybe be a 2 to 3 year deal.
Yep.
I'm not saying that the Mets sign Soto, they can't re-sign Alonso, but I think Walker is one guy. And then on the trade front, I would maybe consider Vladimir Guerrero Jr. as an option. I think the Jays are in an awkward period with their roster where they could be open to moving guys. It sounds like they're definitely going to move Bo Bichette. And so I think if Guerrero's on the market and you can't re-sign Alonso, that's one where maybe you trade some of that prospect capital and make the move. Because if you do lose Alonso, that is, especially as shown in the postseason, that is a big hole to fill.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. It'll be really interesting to see just, how if they do have to pivot, if they do, Guerrero's a very interesting name to see, obviously, even for a year. If that's someone that you want to maybe try and sign after the fact, that you bring him over, almost, kind of like we did with Lindor. But I guess another name too, that'll put things we keep forgetting is Ronnie Mauricio, right? He's, could play third, going to be come back this year. So obviously that makes things a little more interesting too with what they want to do. But I would imagine they would want, if they do lose an Alonso, they would want at least some stability first and third. Obviously, Vientos had a great year last year. You want to make sure you can replicate it. Obviously, I don't know if they want to put too much stock in those couple of young guys, especially when I think guys like Gilbert are going to get a chance to play this year in the outfield and stuff as well. I think they might want a little more solidified on the infield with Vientos being there, but we'll see. More options are good to have, especially with youth, right? That'll be interesting to see how Mauricio comes back from the knee injury.
Yeah, and honestly, Mauricio might be a guy you look to move.
Sure.
Mauricio, it took him a while to get to the majors, and while I think he's definitely an exciting player. He's super athletic. He hits the ball hard when he makes contact. The issue is that, he only had a 296 on base percentage. He only ended up with a 643 OPS in that cup of coffee. He's really struggled with plate discipline over the years, and he couldn't even resume baseball activity this year. So it almost makes you wonder what his role is going forward. So I think Mauricio's a guy from the farm that would probably be on the trade block along with Brett Beatty. And then from the major league roster, I wouldn't be surprised if they look to move maybe a guy like McNeil or Marte, a guy who is going to be in for Marte. I mean, he's 36 now.
Right.
He's on the last year of a 4-year deal. For McNeil, he'd be on the third year of a 4-year deal, and he's going to be 33 in April. So those are two guys from the major league roster I could see. Maybe they try to throw them in as part of a deal to get a bigger bat.
Sure. I agree with that, especially with Marte. If you can eat some of that, eat the money on the last year to kind of get yourself, more back on the trade side. McNeil, I think you mentioned obviously, but he did sign that 5-year extension. Was that 2 years ago? So it's still it's $11 million a year. He plays multiple positions. I think that's a deal that teams would take up on. I agree with you there. I would imagine that would, if they do stuff like that, that would be more for the pitching side, whether it's bolstering the bullpen or even a starter or something like that. But it's going to be interesting between the checkbook being wide open and having some, some capital as far as minor league trade capital and a couple at the major league level. It should be, it's going to be a different looking group next year for sure. But I think it in a very good way, in a positive way that's going to make this team competitive.
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, I'm really excited to see what Stearns can do, and I have a ton of confidence in him. I think between the savvy signings like he's already made and the going after the big ticket items. I mean, he has so much money coming off the books right now, and he this is the first time I feel like he's really operated with a big budget available to him. Milwaukee does not spend the way the Mets or the Yankees or the Dodgers do. So I think seeing Stearns operate with more wiggle room, he's going to do a lot of great things, I think, and wouldn't be surprised, both on the free agent market and on the trade market. I expect them to be pretty active.
Yeah, agree. It's going to be a exciting winter in Queens. Hopefully these dominoes start to fall sooner or later because everybody gets antsy in the winter. But it should be a lot of fun. So obviously we'll keep everybody up to date on what's going on the offseason world, signings, trades, and all that. It's going to be a fun winter, and we'll keep you updated on everything. And as always, let's go Mets.